It's hard to imagine, but this smiling chap, just riding his bike and apparently doing nothing wrong, was once the scourge of the Scottish Isle of Skye, even being chased by the local police and taken to court. He was a torture for cameramen, directors, and producers to work with, and in terms of gym training and attitude to his own body, he is not like any athlete we know. He's also dyslexic, and oddly enough, that's gonna come back a plus. Tonight you'll discover the other side of the legendary Danny MacAskill. You will learn the chilling details of his biography and, perhaps at the expense of our hero, change your attitude to extreme sports just by watching the video to the end. This story begins on the 23rd of December, 1985, in the village of Dunvegan on the Isle of Skye, where an extraordinary boy was born into the ordinary Scottish family of Peter and MacAskill, who absorbed all the destructive energy of these places. If you have seen the film Problem Child and remember the chaos and destruction that the hero of the film wreaked, he was a sweet and obedient boy compared to Danny, because little MacAskill did not just break things by accident. He genuinely loved to destroy things. He used to go into the woods to saw and break branches and even whole trees, found and destroyed abandoned buildings, managed to drop a 300 kilograms plow on his head and cut the back of his head. For fun, he threw huge rocks from cliffs into the sea, swinging them with his own weight and risking his life. He dumped petrol from his father's car and set fire to anything that could be set alight, while local constable Duncan Carmichael's job was to hunt down the younger MacAskill. His love of destruction was so strong that, as a schoolboy, Danny seriously dreamed of becoming a demolition entrepreneur. Likes to play with fire, burns his arms and legs, fell 6 meters from the tree, remained unconscious, but never breaks anything, never has to go to hospital. I was apparently made of rubber, he says and laughs, mama and all lets him. And when he got his hands on a bike, dangerous street riding was added to the mix, and Danny take out the constable. So he seriously arrested our hero, read him his license and confiscated the bike. But to take away his bike for the rest of the summer holidays was really mean. It was like only allowing Roger Federer to play badminton. Danny was suspended from his studies and even threatened with court action, but he was lucky to get off with a warning. The bike was still confiscated, however, and our Professor Chaos was looking for some destructive entertainment. As a child, he was a wild one, Danny says about himself. I liked it when something breaks, a roof collapses, a tree or an old wall falls down.
It's nice and peaceful here, isn't it? Back in the day, you'd probably hear a few explosions coming from my garden. You know, from the fires in the back, you know, we'd be testing out whatever would explode. It's terrible. I don't know if I've ever tested for any hyperactive disorders, but I was really probably quite a difficult kid.
Quote, this is the strange way in which I was preparing for a future life in which I would try not to seriously injure myself by behaving as if I had no interest in anything other than injuring myself. Fabio Wibmer is Triteca's most famous ambassador in the mainstream media, but old-timers know it all started with Danny MacAskill.
No. Hardcore old-timers know it started with Jeff Lenoski.
No. Really hardcore old-timers remember that it started with Hans Ray, Martin Ashton, and Chris Ackrig.
Well, it did start with those four, Hans Ray, Martin Ashton, Chris Ackrig, and Jeff Lenoski, were perhaps the first to creatively show what trialing was capable of outside of competition. Young MacAskill watches the tapes of their rides and is so impressed that he decides to destroy himself and his bike from now on. He will work in the workshop of Bothy Bikes in Aviemore, 6 hours from home. So now the village of Dunvegan can breathe a sigh of relief. What Aviemore couldn't. All of Danny's spare time was spent writing. And when he wasn't writing, he was working, and he wasn't interested in anything else. Of course, when you take all the energy you used to spend on arson and destruction and put it into one single endeavor, you inevitably become at least good at it. And in Danny's case, epically good, so it's no surprise that trialing brand Tardy Bikes were quick to take him under their wing. What it looked like, Danny would break the bike down and they'd give him new parts for it, and what you're seeing now are MacAskill videos for Tardy Bikes from 2006, 2007. One of them actually got over 1 million views on MySpace. Mind you, YouTube came into existence in 2005, which is like yesterday, and it wasn't popular yet. In 2007, Dave Cleaver, co-founder of Tardy Bikes, started his own company called Inspired. The inspired story began with an idea to introduce a unique 24-inch wheel street frame which would bridge the gap between hardcore street mountain bike and traditional trials riding. The prototype frame that emerged from months of hard work required a suitably tough pilot to test it to the limit and prove the concept was viable. Enter Danny MacAskill. At 5'9", Danny was much more comfortable on it than on a classic 26, and it was the most successful street trial bike of the day. Danny rented a flat with BMX rider and cameraman Dave Sowerby. And when a cyclist and a cycling videographer meet at the same point in time and space, they naturally start filming, and there was no goal of fame, money, or influence. Danny, who grew up with VHS tapes and didn't have his own computer and didn't know how these YouTube things worked and didn't want to know. The aim was simply to make something cool, and that's where dyslexia came in, strange as it may sound. Danny has poorly developed verbal analytical thinking. Because of this, in school had problems with subjects where you have to write or read something, that is, almost with all of them, but in contrast to this he has well-developed imaginative thinking. Simply put, his imagination created spots that could not see ordinary people. Agree, who was able to see instead of the roofs of two shops, gap which you have to jump, instead of a regular tree, a flight for flyer, instead of a fence of scary thin metal bars, a path for riding. Well, this is already a complete. With what completely agree passing by people who seem not to have even fully understood what they have just seen. And this video has a couple of other interesting features as well. Firstly, you may have heard that the weather in England is either cloudy or rainy. And this video was filmed in Scotland, where the number of cloudy days is higher than in England because of the hilly terrain and the Atlantic storms. The clear days that you see in the frame are all the clear days that occurred during the 6 months of filming. Secondly, Danny's destructive energy was suddenly combined with perfectionism and a desire to finish what he started at all costs. For example, that drive over the fence took several days of shooting and about 100 attempts and a couple of emotional burnouts. That stunt took several hundred attempts but never made it into the video. And in the case of that jump into the abyss, there were only 3 attempts. But the first one literally split the bike into before and after. Since MacAskill worked as a mechanic himself, he had no problem fixing and maintaining his bike. Quote, "When Dave finished working on the film, we organized a home screening for a few friends. No red carpet, no paparazzi, just beer and crisps. Despite 6 months of hard work, we weren't very excited about the premiere, nor were we eager to see how it would fare on the web. Plus, Family Guy was on TV, and we didn't realize that something big was going on." The video, called Inspired, in honor of the brand that sponsored Danny, had another non-obvious feature. Almost all the tricks were easy for a general audience to understand. There were no complicated combinations of overspins or slides, just big jumps and stunts on a bike on the most ordinary roads. It was entertaining. It was understandable. And it was important. One fine morning, almost immediately after the film came out, Danny got a call from an unknown number. The person on the other end of the line said he was from the BBC and wanted to take interview. The reality of what was happening did not immediately sink in for MacAskill. Remember, Danny did not yet have his own computer. And in general, we don't need your internet. Dave Sowerby was the only one with a laptop, and when they went online they found that the video had already been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. And that famous writer Stephen Fry and legendary cyclist Lance Armstrong had written about it on their Twitter pages. The video has now been viewed 40 million times, but 15 years ago our hero was already being approached by various energy drink companies and brands, including Red Bull itself. Danny's response to all this, of course, was to ignore it. He didn't care about any of this crap. All Danny wanted to do was ride a bike and work as a bike mechanic, but something had to be done about his personal life, so he accepted an important offer from Tarek Razuli, who broke his back in 2002 while filming the 5th episode of Cranked and ended up in a wheelchair. He set up his own company, Razolution, to help professional cyclists negotiate with brands and earn good money. On Tarek's recommendation, Danny signed contracts with several brands, including Red Bull, which he had ignored for so long. Red Bull have this thing where they help their athletes realize some dream project. In Danny's case, he had the idea of riding across Scotland and filming stunts in the most beautiful and unusual places. Red Bull agreed to provide a budget, a van, and to help negotiate with the administrators of some of the historic sites. After agreeing a deal with Red Bull, Danny went to talk to fashion eyewear brand Oakley at their headquarters in California, USA, which even had its own pump track in the backyard. Life is a fairy tale. What could possibly go wrong? Danny, the same Danny who jumped off a bridge, jumped from rooftop to rooftop, spun from heights, rode on sharpened peaks, managed to ride a pump track and broke his collarbone. 2 months later, Danny was fooling around with friends and broke his collarbone again. To hold the broken part of his collarbone together, they had to operate and put a metal plate in. Why didn't they do that the first time? After a while, Danny could think of nothing more clever than to ride a steam trains behind world downhill champion G. Atherton with a collarbone that had broken twice in a row. As you can imagine, minus the collarbone again. The third fracture in a row had finally managed to cool our hero and even did some good to keep Danny from going bored out of his mind while he rehabilitated on his laptop search location for the shoot. In the summer of 2010, a cured Danny and the same cameraman, Dave Sowerby, made a long journey from Edinburgh to Dunvegan, where Danny used to live, so the title of the video, Way Back Home, is literally McCaskill's homecoming. Of course, there are a lot of interesting details left out of the video. For example, in Dunvegan, he drives past the police station where PC Duncan Carmichael used to work, which is ironic. During the filming of this epic front, the wind was blowing hard, it was cold, the ground was slippery and muddy, and Danny had been riding for 2 weeks and was physically exhausted. And that's just one of the many tricks. Each location has to be found, a trick devised, executed, which in Danny's case could easily be 100 attempts, and beautifully filmed. It was also Scotland, where a sunny day is rare, and out of a planned 5 weeks it took 5 months to shoot. And those 5 months were edited into 7 minutes and 42 seconds.
You spent 5 months filming the most beautiful places in your native Scotland. Great writing. Tell me you were happy with the result.
Unacceptable, Danny replied. When Danny saw what they had done with Dave Sowerby, he was furious because what he saw on the screen was different from what he saw in his head. Some of the stunts couldn't be landed, some of them couldn't be filmed because of the weather. So yes, the video we're enjoying was creating negative emotions in the main character, so Danny was a perfectionist and set the bar so high for himself. But 43 million people didn't think so, and now it's clear that the success of Inspired was no accident and that McCaskill is capable of producing viral videos. Quote, "It is important to live the way you want. It could run you over on the next bus. Of course it's hard when friends get hurt. But if I started thinking about risks in that direction, I wouldn't do some things. It also depends on how you grew up. If parents always say, don't do this, don't do that, it will influence you later. But if you learn to fall and land, you learn boundaries." Shooting a segment for Concrete Circus TV program dedicated to street sports can be considered as the next big project Danny, and there are 3 interesting things about this shoot. First of all, Danny wanted to invite the same Dave Sowerby as a cameraman, but during the shooting of Way Back Home he just burned him out emotionally, so we had to invite an extreme videographer, Stu Thompson, who shot the whole thing. Secondly, unlike previous projects, which took 6 and 5 months to shoot, the Industrial Revolution, as they called the segment for TV, took only 6 days. Let's say this ride on the cable turned out to be from the first time. And thirdly, and most importantly, during all the days of filming, Danny's knee was in a lot of pain. Of course, when the camera came on, he'd pop some painkillers and pretend like everything was fine, but look at how big and hard he was doing the flat jumps. Looks like one sore knee McCaskill is as strong as 3 or 4 healthy knees of a normal person. But all kidding aside, the rest of the time, Danny could barely walk.
So, you have a problem with a joint that makes it hard to walk, and you have to take pills, and as a professional athlete, you must have seen a doctor.
No, Danny answered. After filming, the knee let go a bit. Danny decided it was fine and ran off to shoot the next project, Strength in Numbers, from the Divine Anthill Films. The movie was released in May 2012, starring such legends as Graham Agassiz, Cam McCall, Brandon Semenuk, G. Atherton, Anthony Messerer, even Thomas Vanderham and Wade Simmons. In short, the lineup is stellar, the movie is stellar. McCaskill, while still filming, still with the same bad knee, fell, slipped on goose droppings and injured the ligaments in his knee, and at the same time felt that something was wrong with his back. And that's when Red Bull finally decided to take matters into their own hands and sent McCaskill to California, USA, where the already familiar Athertons were training in a huge gym. Athertons were in complete shock. This Scotsman could jump off a roof or do a somersault, but was unable to lift dumbbells. How does it work? And it works like the old adage, to run you have to run, to roll you have to roll. So Danny's rolling alone was enough, but only up to a point. The thing is that there are a lot of moving parts in our body, driven by different muscles, and all of them can work according to the compensatory principle. In a simplified form, if you, for example, have an underdeveloped broadest muscle of the back, but due to watching German short films, you have a well-developed biceps, you can pull up at its expense. The same logic works for the whole body. Danny's spinal muscles were underdeveloped, hence the partial rupture of his spinal disc. So in the gym, under the supervision of rehab coaches, Danny finally had to work the muscles to improve the overall strength of the whole body. But the spinal injury didn't go away, and all that pumping was just a lead-in to the surgery. If anything, it's common practice to work your muscles to the point of exhaustion before surgery so that in the postoperative period, where you don't move much, so that the muscles don't atrophy as much. And you can get back in shape faster. The operation was successful and the trainers started to load Danny with even more fierceness in the gym. Quote, I would wake up at 6 a.m. and go to gymnastics, which was like torture, doing strength and cardio exercises for 3 hours. Inhuman. Rehabilitation took just under a year, and to keep from going cuckoo, during the difficult and boring exercises, Danny was coming up with ideas for a new video, and he came up with ideas that I was surprised. Due to the same dyslexia, his sketches and notes looked like a child's, but the ideas themselves were mind-blowing and included, for example, a Deadloop from Hot Wheels, a Formula One car, and a sheep chariot. A sheep chariot. Alas, the people around Danny were more sensible, so not all the ideas went into production, but it was enough to make perhaps the most amazing, extreme video, in which we go into the imagination of little Danny, in which the adult Danny jumps on human-sized children's toys. The Imaginate video itself you've probably already watched, or you will, you're not going anywhere. But the details from the shoot are what we're here for. First of all, not many people know, but Vision Ramps built all the figures for the project. The woman who played Danny's mom is actually Danny's mom. Secondly, at the train station you can see a Dunvegan sign as a tribute to McCaskill's homeland, but there is no train station in the village itself. So it's not worth buying tickets. Thirdly, many stunts were filmed for an agonizingly long time. For example, radius flights were not Danny's crown, so this jump on the Tower of Cubes turned out with God knows how many attempts. And this seemingly simple for a McCaskill flyer took 4 days of shooting and a lot of nerves. And when filming a stunt on the trunk of a tank, by the way, the real tank, Danny fell on his back and passed out. Somewhere I've heard that before. And also, after the first somersault on Dandy magazine, Danny got dizzy and lay down with an inflammation of the inner ear, leaving the shooting for 3 weeks. On top of that, it hadn't been that long since his spinal surgery, and he felt nowhere near as rolled and agile as usual. Yeah, that meat you saw in Imaginate is kind of a fluid version of Danny. It's scary to imagine what his best version is capable of. Almost always, that beauty performed by athletes, or rather badasses like Danny, actually in the background contains a lot of labor, torture, effort, and of course injury. McCaskill jumped in way back home with back pain. During the filming of Industrial Revolution he could hardly walk, and during the filming of Imaginate, he hasn't even finished all the rehab yet, and if you're wondering what it's all about, look further. If, after all you have seen and heard, you think Danny is a reckless man, I would ask you to consider a few things. When he jumped into fishing nets from a height of 6 meters as a child, he protected himself with mats. The first spins on a bicycle Danny practiced on foam rubber that he and his friends stole from the amusement park. Many of the more dangerous stunts he first tried landing on mats or even in an inflatable cushion. This was the case with the flare in Inspired, the front flip in Way Back Home, several tricks in Imaginate, and the front flip in Epic Win. In The Ridge, Danny climbed the highest cliff using a safety harness. Or remember the video Cascadia, which ended with a jump from a cliff into the ocean. Of course, during such jumps, there is a rescue boat at the bottom in case the jumper hits the water, loses consciousness, and starts drowning. But in the general side view, in the first person, you can't see the boat and you'll never guess how the director managed to hide it. They didn't. It wasn't there. Okay. There was a single diver on duty, but McCaskill still had to swim to shore by himself. If he hadn't gotten enough speed and crashed on the rocks, neither the diver nor the boat would have saved him. And in the movie, the rich Danny climbed up the rock with a safety harness and then came down, took it off, and climbed up again.
Epic shots going on here. I quite literally am climbing the pin with my bike.
It's terrifying and incredible at the same time.
Yeah!
And as you can imagine, not all of his jumps involved mats. Now let's return to the question with which I began this chapter. If, after everything you saw and heard, you thought that Danny was a reckless person, it didn't seem to you, even taking into account all the mats, airbags, insurance, and one diver. Since turning pro, he has been off his bike more than on, sidelined with a long list of injuries that include 3 broken collarbones, 2 broken feet, a torn meniscus, a torn disc in his back, and countless sprains, strains, and lacerations. Almost all of them from bike accidents. Quote, I think I've been hurt, or recovering, like 2/3 of the time since the first video. It would seem that this is the right moment to scold extreme sports as a dangerous activity that cripples normal people, but I propose to remember once again what kind of passions and peculiarities nature has bestowed on Danny. And to look at extreme sports from a different angle, what if it's not a dangerous activity that cripples normal people, but a way for unusual people like Danny to realize themselves and find their place in the sun? Instead of doing unimaginable things and straining the local constables, let them better release their energy in various sports, and we will gladly watch it. Quote, it might be that I do a little bit of less productive content, but I don't know when it will be that I do my biggest bunny hop, as I'm still able to hop as high as when I was in my 20s, so I've still got that level. I'd like to still do it for as long as possible, and then maybe have more of an ambassador's role. Much of the material for this video is taken from Danny McCaskill's autobiographical book, At the Edge, Writing for My Life, and of course, from footage of his projects. Danny's story can be seen as a survivor's mistake, considering the huge number of extreme athletes who have irrevocably crippled themselves before reaching such heights. So my advice to you is to ride a bike, but do it wisely, to be physically healthy, and to realize that I'm not doing something wild. Then everything will be fine. If you feel like saying thank you for this episode, subscribe to the channel, be sure to turn on notifications, rate the video, write a comment. And in return, I'll give you more content. And to those who are already with me, thank you. Your support helps me dig deeper, and thank you, Danny, for sharing the details of your life with us. All more info in the video description. See you in the next videos.
Thank you for watching.